Hello! So today we're going to be talking about all the books that I read in the month of October and looking forward into what I plan on reading in November. Here's a quick look at the October reads. It looks more impressive than it probably is. The Crippled God is on there, which is 1,200 pages, but I spread that out over 2 months, so I didn't read all of that in October. Anyway, I was mostly positive on the books that I read this month. I had a really great reading lineup, a couple of surprises in there, and one DNF. My DNF was, it was Longitude, which was my most anticipated book of the month, sadly. I might circle back to it eventually, but it was just very boring, and I didn't want to read it anymore, even though it was so short. So, onto the books that I read. We'll start from left to right on the graphic rather than doing them in order that I read them. So we're starting with actually the book that I just finished, like just right before I sat down here, and that's The Blue Flames. This is book 3 in the Riverfall Chronicles? The Riverfall Chronicles. The first book is called The Wickwire Watch. The first book, we follow this young boy, very Oliver Twist, who is snooping around where he shouldn't be. He finds a pocket watch full of strange magic, and he ends up stumbling into this world, this society, this group that is full of mysteries, full of secrets, and he kind of gets swept away in it. They offer to keep him safe, and he accepts. So he does agree. He's not actually swept away, but he doesn't really realize what he's getting into when he gets into this, and from there we experience this really tactile, really fascinating magic that comes to the forefront. I'm just on the edge of my seat with the descriptions that are given, but also these characters. You know, it's this found family that I have become so attached to these characters. Everything they go through, I think that one of the strengths of the series is how the characters are so endearing and so layered, but also their relationships with one another and the emotions that they go through as they're encountering a lot of intense stuff. I would say book 3 is more intense than the first 2, but as they're encountering these things, we're going through the emotions with them, and I think that the emotional side of these books is one of their biggest strong suits. I feel so tense watching them go through these things, but also like I get all the same emotions out of it as they do. This book really has me sunk. This series has me sunk into it. Book 3 added to that a lot. Like I said, it's a lot more intense than the first 2 books. There's a lot of emotion in this book. The world expands a lot. The characters deepen, their relationships deepen. I think that this is one of the best found families that I've read in a really long time, and I'm so invested in these characters. I think that each of these books has been better than the last, at least for me. Okay, next up we'll talk about the Radium Girls. So this is a nonfiction. This is following this group of girls that work at a factory painting radium dials, painting the dials of a watch that would make it glow. This is right on the heels of World War I, and they are having to, it's very important to have watches and instruments in the airplanes that soldiers can read in all hours of the day. And so these girls, they have these fine paintbrushes that they would dip in the radium solution and then paint on the dials so that they would glow. But the paint brushes, the bristles would separate with use, and so what they were taught and what everyone did was that they would just slip it in their mouth and bring all the bristles to a point again and then dip it back in their radium solution and paint it on. And this was in a time where radium was generally thought of as a really healthy thing. It was actually kind of to an extreme considered to be something that increases health, that is for vitality, it's for longevity. It's also just in general something that the wealthy will participate in any way they can. Buy radium covered glasses to pour their water in so that they can drink radium water, or toothbrushes, or jock straps. Like there were so many, it was, the book listed a lot of different ways in which they incorporated radium into everything. This is a story of a few women who had this very precise, very detailed job of painting the radium on watches, and very slowly their bodies started falling apart because of what the radium was doing to their bones. It was literally eating away at their bones. And at first they didn't understand what was happening. There's one story of a girl who goes to the dentist because she's having a lot of issues with her teeth. Her teeth keep falling out. She's having pain. And the dentist felt her jaw was loose and just with his hands, with very little pressure, just lifted her jaw out of her mouth, just detached it from her skull. The radium was eating away at these women. They were losing limbs. They were losing jaws. It was grotesque. It's horrible what these women went through, not just physically, but then socially, when they started fighting for their cases, when they started fighting for a reform in the way the dials were being used, in the girls that were still in factories, still painting in the same way, but also for reparations, because they had so many medical bills and they were all losing their lives. Many of these girls died, and the ones that were fighting in trial too didn't have a lot of time left either. They had families, they had kids, they had people that they cared about that they were going to leave behind because of this practice that people knew was dangerous, but they didn't tell the girls because the alternative was less proficient. It is an infuriating read, but it's also a very hopeful one. Kate Moore really focuses in on the resiliency of these girls and the fight, as well as their families that came around them and loved them dearly and cared for them so much, even in the midst of so much pain. We're gonna do a fiction next. Spinning Silver. This one was such a surprise. I fully went into this anticipating a rant. I told my patrons, this was my patron pick of the month. I told my patrons, if you choose this as the book that I'm gonna read this month, you're going to get a rant. I'm not gonna like the book that you chose for me. And they chose it anyway. And I loved it so much. So I didn't know this going into it, nor did I realize it all throughout reading it. But afterward, someone in my Discord, when we were buddy reading the book, because we buddy read all the books that we read, people can join whichever books they want to. Spinning Silver, one of the people that read it as well mentioned that this was a Rumpelstiltskin retelling, which I didn't know. It's not a fairy tale that I'm super familiar with, but I see it now that it's been told. So Miriam is a moneylender's daughter, and her family is very, very destitute at this point. Her mom is dying. She is starving. Her dad is a moneylender who is, he won't go out and pursue people repaying their debts. He's very soft-hearted, and he will give up his dinner so that his wife and daughter can eat more. You know, he's not selfish, he's not hateful, he's a very loving father, but he is failing his family in that he's letting them starve rather than going out and doing the business that he got into. Miriam eventually gets tired of it all, and she decides to take on his business, and she starts collecting debts, and she becomes very hardened, she becomes very harsh, and very quickly she's successful, and very quickly she gains a lot of wealth in this, but she's irresponsible in that as well, because her parents still aren't really guiding her in how to manage this either. With that, there's also the Stark. The Stark are these magical creatures. They're fae-like creatures. Think like traditional fantasy fae, not like romantasy fae. So they're this mysterious, enigmatic group that the people do not want near them. And the Stark are drawn by wealth, and so every time they come near, you see hoof prints, or I think they say clove prints in the snow. You see there's like this glimmer in the forest of where they've been, and they start coming nearer and nearer Miriam's home, and eventually they start interacting with Miriam. They start one Stark starts giving her Sark's silver in exchange for gold. She has to turn it into gold. And there is an agreement that's made. I won't go into it all, but there's an agreement that's made, and she ends up being whisked away to the Stark Land, and that's largely due to her pride, and her negotiating and her bargaining and her greed. And just the same, we also have, well, not just the same, but also Miram had hired a young girl named Wanda, also from a very poor family. She had hired her on as an extra hand, and we follow her and her family life and her as she continues to work for this family after Miram leaves. And we follow a third girl, Irina, as well. Really, actually, this book has a lot of perspectives. We get into the head of a lot of different characters. That's probably the one big negative that I have about this book, is that everybody is first person perspective, and really the writing style isn't very distinct between perspectives. Now, the characters are very distinct, but the writing style isn't. And so if you're not going to put a header to say, like, this is Wanda's perspective, this is Miram, now we're with Miram, now we're with, anyway, we follow, there's probably like 10 different perspectives that we follow, but they're not distinct enough in writing style, not in character, but in writing style. So each time we change perspective, I have to read several paragraphs before I finally am grounded in that perspective, which just isn't ideal. It keeps pulling me out of the book. But this book is so mythical. It's so fairy tale. It feels so tactile and tangible. I'm there. I am there in that book. I have been whisked away into this winter land along with everybody else. All this elusive magic that I don't understand. Irina also has some really interesting magic in her perspective as well. But these characters that I become really attached to, these hurdles that they have to overcome, the mistakes they make, they're very flawed characters, and the way that they rise up. This is soft magic, a really whimsical world that feels too big to understand. And so you do what you can to try to overcome, but everything isn't spelled out as far as how the mechanics of how it all works, because it feels like magic. I don't think it's a perfect book. I actually think that Novik, the way she writes her big action scenes, are very often difficult to discern exactly what's happening. Sorry, buddy. So in the great big end battle, I was just kind of like, there's action. I don't know. Like, I didn't really care though, because I wanted to get back to the characters anyway, as well as the being pulled out of the book every time we switch perspectives, which we did a lot until I could get my grounding again. It's a flawed book, but it's still a 5-star book for me, because I haven't experienced a soft magic atmospheric read like this in a long time. And I loved it. Okay, next up is my very unpopular opinion, and that's The Devil in the White City. So this is a nonfiction, technically, but my big problem with it was that it didn't really function as a nonfiction, at least for half of the book. So this is following two men, Burnham, who conceptualized and engineered and brought together all of the people and really fought for creating the World's Fair. It follows him and all of the hurdles that he encounters, be it the bureaucratic stuff or the people that he has to bring onto the team in order to make these things, the inventions that they came up with in order to do this, all the tiny little details that he was so fixated on so that he could make the World's Fair really as extraordinary as it was. And then we also at the same time follow a serial killer whose name was Mudgett, but he changed it to Holmes, who at the same time builds up his own murder mansion, basically, that he lures women into and kills, and he uses the crowds of the World's Fair as a way to bring in more people, supposedly. So this is a nonfiction following these two men that never meet. Their stories really never converge, but they're both building something up for different purposes at the same time, and it's following both of their stories and doing a lot of paralleling with their stories. My main issue with this is that it is called a nonfiction, that Larson himself, especially in the introduction, is emphatic. No matter how macabre and intense this story may seem, it is real. This is nonfiction. This is not fiction. But in the end notes, in the sources page, he explains, I made most of it up on the serial killer side of things. He did have testimonies, newspaper articles, police reportings that he did use, and he incorporated those things into the story as well, but he also just fictionalized a lot of Mudgett's story without actually distinguishing what's fictionalized and what's not as you're reading through it. The only way that you would really know is if you comb through the sources page. And for me, I think that this was a very interesting story. I think that Larson did a very good job of it in how compelling he made it and in the connections he made and the motifs that he drew from both of the men. But I just didn't like the lack of transparency. I just didn't like that it's marketed as a nonfiction and he emphasizes this is real. But then most of Mudgett's story is him building things out. And I give really specific examples. I talk through all of it in my dedicated video that I did earlier this month for this book, so you can see into all of that. I do think that there's a lot to be praised about this book, but there's also a lot that I'm very critical of, which is why it ends up having a pretty low rating for me. It's a very unpopular opinion. This book is extremely well loved, but it is the truth. And so there you go, you have it. Okay, continuing with the fiction, nonfiction pattern here. The next book I'll talk about is one that I have not finished at the point of filming this video. It's The Crippled God. This will be done this month, but I have a chapter and a half left, which is the size of an entire book on its own. I might be exaggerating a little, but I actually don't think I'm exaggerating very much. I think I have like 250 pages left in this book. I'm not sure. I'm reading it on ebook, and ebook pages are different. And there will be a review next week for The Crippled God as I finish it up and get my notes together. A week from today, we will have a long spoiler-filled discussion. I don't have a star rating for this one because I'm not quite finished with it. Again, it will be finished before the end of the month, but not before this video is done. The spoilers will be next week though. Next up, let's talk about Hiroshima. I wasn't expecting to read this book this month, but the library hold that I've had for a while finally came in and I was like, it's only 150 pages. Let's just do it. This was incredibly difficult to read, as most of the nonfictions that I pick up are. This is following 6 testimonies of 6 survivors of the bomb in Hiroshima, the atomic bomb in Hiroshima. This was originally a magazine publication. It was originally a journalistic report on this is more of the extent of what happened in the aftermath of this bomb that really wasn't being reported on, at least not widely. And so we're following the testimonies of people that survived this experience. We see people being buried in rubble. We see people digging their kids out of rubble and then just being in complete shock. And rather than tending to those kids, going and digging up winter clothes to put on them, even though it's the dead of summer and they don't need it. But they're just in shock and they don't know what to do other than just, let me get more supplies. Let me meet this need, even though it's not the most immediate need. We see people pulling water for those that are badly injured, but they can't get enough for everyone, and so they have to walk away so that they can help more people. We see people having to discern, who do I help, who's too far gone, and I have to leave so that I can help those that might be able to use my help more. It's really devastating seeing the aftermath of all of this and what people suffered. It's very stark. Hersey told the testimonies without really very much or really any authorial insertion. He didn't give commentary. He didn't give thoughts. He didn't give elaborations. He just told the people's stories. And then that was it. And then we do check in on them, I think 6 years later, if I'm remembering correctly. I read this book over the course of like 2 days, and it was a lot. It was a lot to read the extent of the radiation poisoning and the effects on their bodies and the effects emotionally and mentally, it's a heavy, heavy book, but incredibly worth the read. Those are all the books that I completed in the month of October. Sorry for ending on such a heavy note. I also did not finish, but will be finishing in November, Annihilation. I'm rereading Annihilation and it's so wonderful. It's better every time I read it. It's so mysterious. It draws me in. This is the book that made me love biological settings. It's a story about an area that's sprouted up and no one knows why and no one knows what's behind it, but it's clearly something extraterrestrial. And they keep sending expeditions in to research it, to try to understand it better. And we're following the 12th expedition. We're following specifically the biologist on the expedition. And we're watching her as well as her other people on the team as they explore. First, they explore the tower or the tunnel, depending on how you see it. It's this thing that's not on the map, so they go to explore it, and it doesn't really seem quite as they initially perceive it. There's writing on the wall in fungi that draws them deeper into the tower, that draws them deeper into the tunnel, that is saying something very abstract, it seems, and what does it all mean? We're actually in the expedition in Area X looking at this biologically impossible ecosystem, and weird things are happening. And I love it so much. There's going to be a video on this too. I'm doing the Crippled God next week, but the week after that, we're talking about Annihilation again. I can't help it. We just have to. Let's quickly go over, this video's been quite long, I'm very sorry. Let's quickly go over the books that I plan on reading in November. I don't look deeply into the books that I'm going to read, so it'll be quick. Here's a quick look at it. We have some nonfiction and some fiction, a couple of new releases, as well as some rereads. Starting with The Strength of the Few, this is the sequel to The Will of the Many. Many of us are anticipating this. The Will of the Many is a book that, it seems like everyone was reading this book when it first came out. Everyone was talking about it. My brother read it twice. He read it and then immediately started rereading it, and then I texted him to tell him that the sequel was coming out. He's like, I just reread it for fun because I was thinking about it. This is great timing. So I'm gonna read the sequel too. I'm really excited to see where the story goes from here. So I'll be reading it on November 11, right when it's being released. Next up we have Brigades and Bread Knives. This is the sequel to Legends and Lattes. This is my Patreon pick of the month. The first book was a very cozy book about a coffee shop, about a couple of people opening a coffee shop that extended into a bakery, and it was mostly it just felt good to read. It was very atmospheric. The characters were really sweet and sincere. So I'm excited to see what Travis Brulé does with this sequel. This is one that I didn't really feel like needed a sequel, but I'm gonna read it. My patrons picked it for me, but I'm curious to see where he goes from here. One of my friends got an early copy and she loved it, so here's hoping I will too. Following that sequel train, I'm also reading the second book in the Southern Reach trilogy, Authority. I will happily just continue on and keep rereading. I don't know, I might make it through all 4 of them. I love the Southern Reach so much. The first book is my favorite, but I happen to love the sequels as well. So I'm very excited to get to refresh myself on everything that's going on in this world and pick up new things. Then we have our nonfiction. So first is The Heart of the Sea. In the Heart of the Sea, the tragedy of the whale ship of Essex. This was actually recommended to me from a commenter. I don't know much about this, but I do know that it is a pretty popular nonfiction, I'm pretty sure. An incredible story of the wreck of the whale ship of Essex, an event as mythic in its own century as the Titanic disaster is in ours. Oh, it's also an inspiration for the climax of Moby Dick. I didn't realize that. Anyway, I'm going to read this, as well as The Rise and Fall of Alexandria, which is pretty obvious what that's about. Those are the books that I'm reading in the month of November. Thanks for chatting with me. I'll see you again soon. Bye.